something, my child?
This incident was relayed to me by my cousin. She works at the outpatient section of TTSH. Please be aware that the TTSH hospital I'll be writing about is the current, newly built hospital and not the old one. That night was as usual. She was getting ready to go home when one of the nurses there asked her if she didn't mind checking some paperwork before she went, so she decided to stay for a while. The checks didn't take long. She managed to finish the papers before 6:30 p.m., the time when the janitor would come to lock the doors of the respective outpatient sections. As she was walking happily towards Novena, she realized that she had forgotten her wallet. She rushed back to the hospital so that she could catch the janitor before he locked her section. As she was running frantically down the corridor towards her clinic, she saw the janitor locking the door. She shouted for him to stop, telling him that she had left something behind. For whatever reason, he ignored her. She continued running towards him, running and shouting. Finally, as she was about 3 feet away from him, he turned towards her and smiled. What she saw freaked her out. The janitor's face was hideous, and his skin looked as if it had been bitten off by thousands of maggots. Before she fainted, she heard him say,
Did you forget something, my child?
When she regained consciousness, the real janitor was looking at her. He asked her what happened and told her that he was a bit late today as his son was sick. He helped my cousin up and then told her never to walk along the corridors again after 7 p.m. He never told her the reasons why, and I don't think my cousin wanted to know either. The following is a story based on a true incident in a hospital where I work. I had a patient quite a few months ago who was transferred to my ward from ICU. When the patient came up to the ward, she was telling us, as in the staff around, what she experienced earlier on in the ICU. Incident happened at around 0100 hours during night shift duty. Patient X was sleeping soundly, but woke up suddenly for no reason. She opened her eyes and noticed that there was someone in white with long hair and bloodshot eyes looking at her. She was frightened by that pair of red eyes and that someone was plainly staring, but not doing anything else. So, my patient quickly closed her eyes and chanted some prayers. Another patient, Y, from the room next door, saw the lady at my patient's bedside and was curious as to how come there's visitors so late at night, and thus called the ICU nurse to ask. The nurse, after hearing this, looked into patient X's room and saw the lady, and then went to go to inform the visitor to go home, as it had already passed visiting hours. The nurse opened the door to patient X's room and entered. She then realized that there was nobody except the patient. So the nurse went up to patient X and asked, "Where's that lady who was just now standing here?" Patient X was so scared that she just cried out. But the following few days after the patient was transferred up, she kept on having a high fever, but doctors could not find out the reason. The above story was told by the patient herself and verified by the nurse who transferred the patient up to the ward, as the nurse was the nurse who saw that someone. Another experience I had was when I was working in one of the wards and had to work till 9 p.m. And that's where the eerie part comes. There was this particular patient who liked to sit on the bed or lie on the bed staring blankly at the fan, which was above her. Me and my friends were curious as to whatever thing she was watching, and so we observed her from far. Maybe she realized that we were watching her, and she turned to look at us with big eyes. We quickly looked at something else, and when we looked at her again, she started to stare at the fan again. Maybe there is really something there for her to stare at. Another story is when me and my friend were doing our rounds to see whether the patients are snugly tucked in their beds and comfortably sleeping. There was this patient who couldn't sleep, and so we ended up talking to her. She pointed outside the window and asked us, "What is that?" Me and my friend looked out of the window, but nothing could be seen except for the next building of the hospital. We told her that is another building of the hospital, but she said no. She said there is something else there which bothered her. She complained that she couldn't sleep because of that. We were shocked. Luckily that time, we were about to sign out, and we told the patient not to worry about that thing and to go to sleep. She refused to sleep, but kept looking outside the window. We then tucked her neatly under the blanket and left her. I asked my friend whether she saw anything, and she said no. Me too. Then, what is it then? When I was admitted to Tan Tock Seng Hospital for appendicitis, I recalled a horrifying tale told by one of the Indian Amma, who always came into the ward I was admitted at to clean the area. Due to boredom for staying in the hospital, I befriended her, and she told me the incident that she had encountered at the old Tan Tock Seng Hospital, which she used to work before. The old Tan Tock Seng Hospital, as we knew it, used to be creepy, with lots of big trees. The lights were very dim, and the pathway was rather spooky, unlike now. It was at that night when the Amma was pushing a trolley at one of the sheltered pathways in the building's premises. On the left side of the pathway stood a number of big and tall trees. The sheltered pathway itself was dimly lit, making the whole place look totally eerie. It was at this moment the Amma suddenly caught something moving about among the trees. The movement indicated that someone or something was running from one tree to another at top speed in a funny and strange running motion. The Amma thoughtlessly stopped and tried to focus her eyes on that area by staring at it. Finally, she caught a glimpse of the shape. The figure looked like a man, and he seemed to be holding a fan, similar to which people used to fan satay when they were cooking it. But the strange thing was that he had an incredibly long pair of legs, 2 times the length of normal human legs, and the creature was playing peekaboo with the Amma. It was so disturbing that the Amma left her trolley there and ran away from that place. She asked someone to collect the trolley later on. The Amma related the incident to a security guard, and the guard explained to her that it was probably a hantu gala or pole ghost. Not sure if it meant any harm or not. This is a story about my encounters at NUH. NUH is located near some forested area. I am a staff member of NUH, working normal shift work, and on that particular day I was working the afternoon shift, which ended at 10 p.m. My office was located on the 6th floor of NUH, main building, and directly facing the forested area with big trees and a staircase leading up the hill. If I look out my window, to my right I could see NUS and a small road parked with cars. It was a normal day for me. My fiancé will always wait for me at the 5th floor staircase which leads to my office. There is a door on the 6th floor by the staircase, and you have to scan the staff pass to enter, so strictly no outsiders. The corridor outside my office is always very creepy, and if I turn to my right, I can see the forest again. So, like other days, I walked as fast as I could and never even turned to my right. As I reached the door which leads to the staircase, I pushed the button to unlock the door. But unfortunately, the button didn't work, and the door never opened. I called my fiancé to tell him to go up the stairs, as I was very scared. There is a small window on the door, and I could see him walking up the stairs. While waiting for him to reach the door so I can ask him to get help for me, I turned around, and I don't know why, but something just made me look at the forest, which I never did before. I saw a white figure looking directly at me with long hair, somewhere among the trees, but I told myself it was probably just my imagination. Then, suddenly it moved. It looked like it was floating. That was when I realized it was for real, and that was it. I started panicking. I was lucky that it did not come to my direction. I could feel my heart beating so fast, and my legs felt like jelly. I was breathing very fast. As soon as my fiancé appeared near the door, I started crying and telling him I need to get out. He told me to calm down, and like 5 minutes later, while waiting, a technician arrived. Probably they saw us from the security cam. They fixed the button, and I was free. It was a bad day for me. Now, my office has moved to the first floor, which is nearer to the A&E, and definitely safer for me and the rest of my colleagues. An average-built foreign national construction man stood there, panting at the counter. Just another industrial accident dressing, so I thought. Being ignorant, the man helped himself to sit, leaving me wondering if it was a prank. I approached him and asked what happened. Later, I found out he couldn't speak or understand the language. I fetched his identity and assisted him into the treatment room. Meanwhile, I informed my coordinator about his condition, and we suspected him of an asthma trigger. I began to reassure him, and ironically, he lay on the couch bed with his palm tugged on his cheekbone without any answer. He was still wheezing hard, yet posing that beach paradise island relaxation. He looked deep into my eyes and smiled. I was stunned. I left the room and dashed to my coordinator to handle the questioning in the room. The clinic saw an average crowd that day. I continued the operation. Amidst the strong voice of my coordinator in the room, I sensed this wasn't good. Calling for the doctor's review, my coordinator rushed out for assistance. When noises from the room broke into silence, another colleague peeked to help. Minutes later, "Call the ambulance, now," was shouted from the room. Without further delay, I made the phone call and announced to the patients to stay calm. My curiosity grew as I headed towards the room to find the man was unconscious. Meticulously, the doctor inserted a lifeline, but was unsuccessful, while my colleagues resuscitated the casualty with two-man CPR. I could see foam developing from his mouth. Skin was cold and clammy. Eyes were mere bloodshot. Yet we still proceeded with the resuscitation until the paramedics arrived. The ambulance came. No pulse, no breathing. Shortly after investigation, it was declared by the paramedics as a death. Unfortunately, it was the eve of Chinese New Year. Pounding on my disbelief of what happened, some patients made their way out and left large red bags of celebration cookies. The doctor off-rostered himself after that incident. Patients who left never came back. A couple of months later, I received a phone call from HR complaining about the expensive billing usage of oxygen for the employee. Checking the records, sadly, she was referring to that man. I told her of his death. I guess no one knew of the death. Nonetheless, spooks and goosebumps still linger here. Wheezing noises and construction boots' footsteps were often heard. A restless soul? Or just an ordinary legend of the mind's illusions? This story took place during my army days a couple of years back. 12 of us from the same camp shared the same interest in exploring haunted places and looking for ghosts. We went to places such as Lim Chu Kang Chinese Cemetery and Mount Pleasant Cemetery in the dead of night for that adrenaline rush. Fortunately, I did not encounter anything strange until we decided to explore the old Changi Hospital. The old Changi Hospital has since been renovated into a spanking new hospital. However, before that, it was just an old, abandoned, dirty and run-down building. For those of you who have been there, you would know what I mean. This group of friends and I attended a campmate's birthday party at a chalet nearby, and someone suggested that we check out old Changi Hospital since we were already there. We left the party at around 11 p.m. and proceeded to our destination. When we reached there, we followed one of my friends who had been there before. We entered through a side gate leading to a small entrance of the building. When we reached the first staircase landing, that friend suggested that we go up to the highest level and walk along the corridors to the other end of the building. We followed the plan. While we were walking along the corridors, many of us strayed into some of the rooms to peek at its decay. Thus, we did not exactly walk in an orderly manner, with people falling behind and overtaking me constantly. There were about 17 or 18 of us since some friends had brought their girlfriends along, and I did not really remember who were around me. When you are nervous and scared, you do not really pay attention to these details. Eventually, we reached the end of the corridor, and I heard my friend's instruction to take the stairs to the first floor. Those in front started to descend the stairs, and I followed suit. I think I was one of the few who were at the back of the group, thus I just descended without paying attention to the level. I thought just follow the person in front of me, and I should exit at the correct level. For those who had been there, you would know that the stairs lead all the way from the top level down to the basement levels. I just continued going down, level after level, and between each level you had to go down 2 flights of stairs. After descending the first, you had to make a U-turn and descend another before reaching the next level. I saw someone in front of me in a white t-shirt going down the stairs, thus I followed. As I descended the first flight of stairs and was about to U-turn to go down the next, my friends called out to me. I looked up and saw all of them standing at the top. I turned to look at which level I was going to, and it clearly stated B1. "Where are you going?" asked one of my friends. I did not say anything and just climbed up the stairs to meet with them before exiting the building. I did not mention anything about it, as the old folks always said that if you were to encounter something strange or supernatural, do not talk about it immediately at the location. Just act like you did not know anything. So the question still plagues me till today. Who was that person I was following down to B1? People say that hospitals are the most unclean places in the world. I can't disagree with that, especially when I personally experienced something weird. After my O-levels, I was granted entry to a course in polytechnics. I decided to take up a job during the 6 months period before I went. A job agency helped me to find a job in a hospital in the material management department. I was to send all kinds of equipment to wards and OTs in offices, be it medical supplies or office stationaries. Here are some of the incidents. The lift. At the time, the hospital was not officially open yet. Only its ER and other ICUs were in operation. One day I made my round up to the SICU to pass supplies to the ward. I pressed for the lift, and when it came, I pushed my trolley into it and ended it. I pressed the B2 button for my department. The door closed, and suddenly it opened again. Thinking that there was someone outside, I peeped out, but there was no one there. I pressed the close button again, and the same thing happened again. This happened for 4 times, and this hair-raising feeling got to me, and I exited the lift. The door closed, and it went down. Geez, I thought. Maybe something is wrong with the lift sensors. I waited for another lift that did finally come and bring me down to B2, but a shock was waiting for me. When the door opened at B2, I pushed my trolley out of the lift, and the lift on the left, which was the lift that refused to take me, opened at the same time. What came out of it totally shocked me. Out came 2 attendants with a metal coffin, those that hospital used to transfer the dead to the morgue, and the family of the dead. The family was weeping and crying. This really chilled me to the bone. For the rest of the day, I felt sick and morbid. Was something in the lift awaiting the arrival of the dead? Was that why it did not allow me to go down? The ward. After a month or 2, my supervisors decided to send a group of friends and I to Old Tomapax Hospital, which was already closed at that time, to retrieve whatever can be salvaged from the old buildings there. The only 2 humans that were there were 2 security guards, a father and son. The first day we went there, I had this feeling that the hospital was covered in a dark aura. The only lift there smelled of disinfectant and death, and it got stuck always in the middle of the 2 stories. Imagine the door opening and you are halfway underground and from the 1st floor. Most of the electricity was out or cut off too. The place, I guess like all abandoned buildings, looked spooky. One day, I and another guy were assigned to count the total number of metal bed frames left in the hospital. We decided to count from the main building first, from the top level down. It was around 5 p.m. when we reached the 2nd story. We opened the ward door with our keys and walked in. It was a Class C ward, comprised mainly of different rooms by partitions, with no doors in front of the partitions, with a long corridor linking every room. We simply looked in and counted the number of beds. I was doing the counting, and my friend was doing the recording. 7 beds. Okay. 10 beds. Okay. Then I came to the 2nd last room. I peeked in and I just continued to the last ward. 8 beds. Okay. But the 2nd last one you never counted. How many beds? Then it struck me why I never counted the beds in that room. I saw a room, fully furnished. There were mattresses and pillows on each bed with cases and all. Looked like a perfect ward in a hospital. And on the first bed right near the door was this old man, dressed in hospital gown and sitting on the side of the bed, looking directly at me. 8 beds. Oh my God, go. I pulled my friend along and walked fast out of the ward, not daring to look to my left as I passed the particular room. My friend thought I was lazy and whacked me on my back when I was out of the ward. I told him exactly what happened. He scolded me even more. He later told me that when a person were to see any unclean things, they're not supposed to tell others, or their bad luck will pass on to the others. To this day, it still sends chills down my spine just to think about it. There was always rumor, it was going around for some time in the hospital, that something was inside the building. But of course, most of the stories aren't real. Most of them are a fragment of the imaginative human mind. But how do I explain this story? Here is a story about a certain hospital. In this hospital, there have always been complaints from the patients that they were being disturbed in the middle of the night. There would always be knocking loud enough to wake them up, and there would also be reports of pinching by thin air. After some checking, it seemed that all of those complaints were related to one point. All of the complainers would have been warded inside this particular ward. The name eludes me. Let's just call it Ward A. It seemed pretty harmless, but over time the complaints got more and more wild. Soon they had no choice but to close down the ward. However, a doctor offered to try to stay in the ward for a night before it closed. What happened made his skin crawl. He was seated in his bed in Ward A. The lights were still brightly lit. He was reading a book he had just bought to keep him company. It was nearing 9 o'clock in the evening. He yawned. Just then, something seemed to move in the far corner of his eyes. He looked over, expecting to see something interesting, but all that he saw was the chair and the decorative painting on the wall. Disappointed yet relieved, he sighs. 9:30 p.m. The ward's lights are turned off. The doctor switches on his personal lamp that is above his head. Continuing to read his book, he ignores much of the surroundings. 10 p.m. The doctor has had enough of reading the book. He decided to retire for the night. Leaving the light on, he falls asleep. 10:30 p.m. Slight rattling woke him up. He stared at the source of the sound. It seems to have come over from his left side, where the chair was located. He also found that a part of his arm seems slightly pinched. He made a mental note before going back to sleep. 10:50 p.m. Something woke him up. It seems the light was disturbing his rest. He reached out and switched off the light before retiring back to bed. 11:10 p.m. He awoke with a start. He had a bad feeling churning in his gut. Something was not right. The chair, which had been on his left side, had been placed directly in front of the bed. In the moonlight, he could make out a black shape sitting on the chair. That jolted him awake. Now fully conscious, he realized that someone, or something, was mumbling to him. He spun his head over to his left where the chair was. He saw several dark figures staring back at him. Unlike the one sitting in the chair, these dark figures had red, bloodshot eyes. He also saw that more and more of these figures were climbing out of the painting on the wall. Spooked, he screamed. Those shadows just stared back at him with hollow faces. He fainted. After that incident, the ward was sealed for quite a while before a priest was engaged to remove the painting on the wall. Soon after the painting was removed, it seems that everything went back to normal. This is a story that was told to me by my elder sister. She was the kind of person who liked to go exploring and stuff like that. She had this sort of instinct passed down by our dad, an instinct that allowed her to see things others couldn't see. Most people who hear this story might not believe it, except some of her friends whom she told, and who were also there with her on the day she went exploring. Whoever knows me might know my sister because she is kind of popular. So here I am, telling a story my sister told me about last year. It was about her outing of an exploration which took her to the old Changi hospital. She says that whatever story is written in the True Stories column about OCH mostly isn't true, because she has been there herself and not quite encountered whatever they encountered. But she does have a story to tell from there. My sister, Lynn, was there with her friends last year, 12 guys and 5 girls, during the Hungry Ghost Festival month. She was warned by Dad not to go anywhere bad because the ghosts are surrounding everywhere, but she was too stubborn to listen. She went off with her friends, and they were there to do their ritual, which she was there just to accompany them. But when she was in, she felt a cold shudder. What's lame about the situation was that she was to stand last at the back, while the rest were in front. She was at the back with 2 guys who were her close friends. They were taking a look out the back when they were going through the door to the 3rd floor. She noticed that the door was already open and was stuck open with a block. But what was shocking was that after going through the door, they heard the door close with a loud bang, as though someone was forcing it shut. Being unafraid of anything, they just ignored it and continued to the 4th floor, where they came across 14 good-looking people, guys and girls, who were all very beautiful. They got to know that they too were exploring, so they decided to meet back on the 2nd floor. When they finished their exploration, they continued going up to the last floor to do their ritual. But then they realized something was amiss, but continued the ritual. When they were doing it, they heard babies crying, someone wailing, and dogs barking. They just ignored it, thinking that it's just because they were disturbing them. That's why there were noises. But it still does not explain the noises being heard. Then, when they were packing up to go home, they heard some girl crying as though it was one of them, but none of them were. So, being too freaked out, they decided to walk quickly and meet the other group, which they had just met, and to get out at once. But when they met the group at the 2nd floor, they were alarmed to see one of the girls crying softly. But how could the noise travel so far up was the mystery. After meeting them, all of them went down to go out the back door. But what was shocking was the back door was blocked with some kind of woods, which was not there before. So they decided to go to the front door with the Malay security guard waiting there. So they did. When they were walking to the front, the girl who had been crying earlier was still crying, but what freaked them out the most was when they went out the front door, the whole group at the back of them disappeared and left them 17 instead of being 21. After being spooked, they quickly went to the old man, but all he said was, "There's nothing to be afraid of." But just then, they heard voices laughing, going past them, and heard a guy say, "Goodbye, my friends, nice knowing you." After hearing that, they looked at the old man, but he just smiled at them and said, "Those people you saw are friendly patients who were once here, so you should not be afraid of them." With that, my sister and her friends exchanged goodbyes and continued walking to the bus stop to go home. That was the story she told me, but I'm not sure if it is true. However, her friends with her then said it is, so I'm not sure. So, I am not sure. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. If you have a story to share, please send it to my email in the description below. This channel is mostly made up of stories sent in by viewers or people they know, or people I know. Another way to support the channel is to sign up for my Patreon, where you can watch my videos ad-free. More perks will be added once I get back from Australia in November. Also, I will be redoing my merch store when I get back, so keep an eye out for that one. Thank you all for your continuous support. And remember,
Papa loves you.